Humans are a finite idea with finite resources. We cut, we burn, we transform our planet. We use technology that we create to do this. This is a sawdust burner, the last of its kind in Ontario, Canada. It was built in the 1950s and used until the 1980s when it was deemed to be too dangerous. Now abandoned, the burner was once part of the G.W. Martin lumber mill in Harcourt, just 3 hours northeast of Toronto. It was considered at one point the most efficient sawmill in Ontario, but by 1988 it was up for sale owing to tragedy and the inevitable evolution of the area becoming a tourist destination.
So the property was purchased in 1958 by a local gentleman named Grenville Martin, and he owned it until 1984 when sadly he died in a plane crash. And although others came in and tried to continue operating without his being there, the entire place was put up for sale in 1988.
Yeah, I know it's not. It's just that you keep moving. Okay.
When we first came across the burner, we had absolutely no idea at all what the building was for or what it had been used for. It looked to us like something, some old relic from the past, but from long past, something from the late Middle Ages or something in the back of a painting by Bruegel or by Hieronymus Bosch. It just sort of stuck out of the landscape there and seemed to have a sort of level of importance that you really couldn't ignore.
Sawdust burners are generally associated with huge logging ventures. They are far more ubiquitous in the West. Today the Harcourt burner sits on an abandoned industrial site on the edge of Algonquin Park. It has been this way since the mill burned to the ground in 1990. Everything ends in fire.
The burner was actually used on site to get rid of the wood waste from the pulping operation. There was a mill that was right alongside the burner itself, and there was a conveyor that shuttled larger chunks of wood waste up to the side of the burner about 3/4 of the way up. And there were also a series of tubes connected to the burner as well from planing mills that were further away for smaller materials that were actually air blown there. What we've read is that the burner never actually stopped operating. So in the 20 to 25 years that it operated, it was always burning wood waste. And it actually, glows. Like it's made out of like a corrugated iron, so it glows constantly. So we had heard initially that the burner was taken out of service because it was a fire hazard and it was causing fires, but actually there was a mesh top to the burner that stopped any kind of sparks or coals or anything like that from leaving the burner site itself. The reason that it was closed was because of environmental reasons. People thought it was a sort of air pollution issue. Victoria and I moved here to the country in the year 2000, and prior to that, both of us were living in cities. I came from Ottawa, and Victoria was from Toronto. And at that time, we were landscape painters living in an urban environment, and we spent a lot of time coming to places that we considered to be quote-unquote, wilderness areas. What we quickly found out after moving here was that the stamp of humanity is all through the woods here. So we became less interested in working off of areas that were perceived to be wilderness to areas that actually had a history of resource use past.
We tend to think that the wilderness is an imaginary place because our associations with it are so romanticized, so mythologized. In many ways, our treatment of the earth through industrial uses shows that we in fact are willing to be ruinous for our desires. This has made the wilderness a kind of theme park, a place we visit because of our perceptions of it. It turns it into a thing of our mind.
The universe is monstrously indifferent to the presence of man. We make objects that help us have meaning and comfort in what is a massive darkness. The things in the wilderness like rocks, trees and water have allowed us to thrive and live astonishing, miraculous lives. What we eat, breathe, wear and live is all given to us by the earth.
Well, in fact, we're painters, we're not philosophers. And the truth is we've decided to spend our time living with trees rather than a lot of people.
So Gary and I moved here to be close to the wilderness, to an empty environment of people. But in fact, there's people everywhere, which is fine. The thing is, Gary had a geology degree and I had been doing theater, and then I wanted to move into visual arts. And what we really shared was the fact that we loved the outdoors. We loved stargazing, we loved wildlife, we loved the whole idea of wilderness.
So we've been on a quest now for several decades to find places to make art about, which aren't standard landscape places. We don't focus very much on the sky. My focus has always been downwards and looking for interesting material on the surface of the earth.
This concept that we have about the wilderness and industrial areas happened very organically. Gary had this geological background. We were always looking at the ground beneath our feet. But for me, the thing that really caught my eye was these little buildings and these little points of small human activity. Maple syrup shacks, little trailers on hunting grounds, ice hut fishing. All of them had a kind of industrious activity to them. And so I thought it was a great marriage of both of our interests in visual arts, where Gary loved these industrial stuff and I liked these small little human activity places. Because really, those places are industrial uses, but they're writ small as opposed to writ large.
So we're very attracted to how nature moves back into a location that was used extensively for resource development, and how nature reclaims these places. In the time that we've been going to the burner, it's remarkable. There's now like little forests of trees that are encroaching upon it and swallowing it up, if you will.
So my question is, who is haunting who at this point? Nature seems to come back into these abandoned areas and foliage grows up through cracks in the floor. It just seems like someone's the ghost. Maybe we're the ghost, or maybe nature's the ghost, but there's the membrane between realities within your experience of being in nature around places like where the burner is suddenly becomes extremely haunted. And you feel an other, you feel a presence there. It once was a place where people worked. And even though what they did there was kind of ruinous and invasive and industrial and colonial and all those nasty things, there were human beings there. And their industry filled a kind of energy in the place that still somewhat exists. And it exists because of the buildings, it exists because of the patterns there, and it exists because it and nature are having to work together now. When it was first built, a lumber mill or a mine, nature didn't have a chance. But once it's abandoned, nature can come back. And over time, the landscape becomes like a palimpsest, where it's like layers and layers of meaning and activity. And so eventually, as a landscape artist in the 21st century, I look at the wilderness now and all I see are stories.
The truth is, for better or worse, a lot of the economy of Canada was driven by natural resource development and use. A lot of people came here to this country from away in order to try to find their fortune here, looking for trees, looking for minerals that they could use for various things. Those activities have left a scar on the landscape. For the most part, those areas are now being taken back over by nature. And so there's this kind of cyclic approach, this kind of push and pull, where where people have come in, they've developed the landscape, and now the landscape's going back. Maybe more people have come back in at a later date, and then the landscape takes over. So there's this kind of push and pull thing, which is something that interested me because it's something that you learn about when you're talking about making a painting. I mean, making a painting is all about kind of like putting material onto a surface and then removing material from a surface, putting it back on the surface again. So there's this kind of circular activity that creating a painting reminds me of.
The hauntedness of the burner and where it sits had its own power, circular power. It was part of taking from the earth. Now the earth was taking back, and now it is dying. The burner will fall over one day soon, and then the story will end and possibly be forgotten.
So we're here, and then we're not. And the forest, it just doesn't really care.
The earth may heal, but we may not always be part of that story.